I always hope that autistic representation is always portrayed very well in movies. And while you can sit there and say like something like Forrest Gump or Rayman don't help, but I would argue though those are much better portrayals of people on the spectrum. Even if it's got its flaws in terms of how it's portrayed, it's better than what the 2000s have brought with regards to that, or even most recently. So hey, with this movie in particular, I mean, I'll take what I can get. At least it's not offending me, I can tell you that much. Even back when I saw it in the theaters, I thought I did pretty good in terms of how it was portrayed. But now that I myself have now understanding what being on the spectrum means and how it's evolved in today's day and age, this is as good as it's gonna get if you ask me.
So who is he?
The accountant.
Like a CPA accountant?
Not quite.
The Accountant is directed by Gavin O'Connor and written by Bill Dubuque. The film stars Ben Affleck, Anna Kendrick, J.K. Simmons, John Bernthal, Jeffrey Tambor, and John Lithgow. According to IMDb's plot synopsis, as a math savant uncooks the book for a new client, the Treasury Department closes in on his activities and the body count starts to rise. Ben Affleck is an enjoyable actor that I do find myself pretty much liking overall. And of course, I also like Gavin O'Connor in terms of what he made a film prior to this in the form of The Warrior. It's a pretty good MMA boxing film that has to deal with two brothers fighting in the ring. And I do highly recommend it if you want something that is truly emotional. Having these two involved, along with its main protagonist being on the spectrum, I hope it would lead to better representation of autism because, like I said at the beginning of this, talk about a group that has always been, if you ask me, sorely lacking in terms of its representation on screen. Because, yeah, like I mentioned, Forrest Gump, Rayman, both Tom Hanks and Dustin Hoffman playing people on the spectrum, but I'm gonna tell you, they did not treat them like they were complete morons or that they were brain dead. They, at the very least, were at least aware of what was going on. In recent years, especially in the last 5 years or so, we've had, two movies in particular. Yeah, unfortunately, we're still in this mess as a community, and I feel like it is something that we have to just get through. And I must reiterate, I am not severely on the spectrum who has to deal with it more so than others. But I am saying is that I recently have found out that I was on the spectrum and I have to look at some representation in today's day and age with regards to me. I saw the film back in 2016 and I enjoyed it. I didn't think it was anything crazy, and at the time, undiagnosed, didn't know what much to think of it. And when I watched the film, I thought it did a pretty good job of autism in terms of talking about it. But having watched the film after almost now 10 years, because that's how long it's been, and now finding out that I too am on the spectrum, I actually really like it. It has a few issues. I'm not going to sit here and act like this movie was perfect. It wasn't. But this is one that I have to kind of disagree with critics, because critics have this, I think, sitting at like a 50 on the tomato meter. And, it did get some criticisms. But I do think that this has got to be one of the best films out there as of right now to portray an autistic person than a lot of other films that have discussed autism. Having a character being on the spectrum and showcasing his life, what it was like to have that, and what it goes in terms of how he dealt with it. I will say, for a protagonist that has it, I do think that they do a very respectful, or at the very least, good enough job to where it's not insulting. So here are now the positives. The performances, I think, are great. Everyone, but particularly Affleck, brings maturity and respect. As for Affleck's portrayal with autism, I have to say it's pretty accurate. It's not to the level of insulting like I have been mentioning. Is in the vein of, it does seem like you can pick up on how he acts, how he likes to have particular things, how he goes about his daily life outside of the killing. part, or uncooking books for terrible people, he does have a life. You do see that. You see how he thinks, how he feels, and so many people can seem like that's standoffish, but I'm telling you, that is how autistic people are. It's not like they're trying to be rude or trying to be jerks to one another. It is just simply that's what it's like. It's somebody who wants to have connections, wants to have emotion, but they can't because they've either had a terrible life that has prevented them from expressing themselves, or are just very reserved and shy. And I think Affleck, while I do think there are a little bit of times where it may seem a little robotic, I do think for the most part, I think him and Gavin O'Connor, they took this approach, and I think Affleck overall, I think, succeeded in that regard. The direction is solid. Director Gavin O'Connor does well with blending both the action and the dramatic scenes that felt well put, and O'Connor also wanted to be respectful with what the subject matter is in terms of, I don't know if it was the main priority, but talking about or at least addressing the character's autistic traits. And I don't think, like I said, it was insulting. I don't think he at all at any point was trying to be rude or disrespectful. I think he did the best that he could with regards to actually discussing it and actually giving people a little bit of insight of what autism is a little bit. There are a couple of scenes where they do try to talk about certain things that Christian, the main character, or autistic people kind of have, which is like stimming. I've been kind of experiencing that lately, or having a hard time connecting with people that aren't on their same wavelength and how particular they like things. So I give a lot of credit to O'Connor for making sure that he includes those things, that feels as if it's not trying to demonize people on the spectrum, but rather trying to understand them in the best way possible. The action is actually well done. Every action sequence is exciting and showcases the choreography very well. It makes me appreciate the fight work that was put into this film. Christian, very methodical, very much dedicated to making sure that whatever he starts, he has to finish. That's the whole point of his character. And for him to have this really good balance of having those fight sequences in the film, I think does a pretty good job of showcasing that for somebody who went through a lot of problems as a kid, I won't deny he was trained pretty well, because the action scenes are quite brutal in that regard. The cinematography is exceptional. Cinematographer Seamus McGovery shot a good-looking film that feels fluent, making sure that its style fits with what the tone of the film is going for. Clearly, Gavin O'Connor wanted to make sure that this ain't autistic people in a way that isn't demonizing, like I've mentioned, or at the very least not dehumanizing them. He wanted to, at the very least, make sure that everything felt level-headed and making sure that everyone understands with what the character Christian and what autism is, but understanding with what the style and tone of what he wanted to go with regards to an action thriller. And I do think that Seamus McGovery does a really good job of nailing that vibe down pretty well. The music is fitting. Composer Mike Isam keeps the gritty tone and vibes that the film sets in place, feeling serious and complex. Just like with the cinematography, Mike Isam does a nice job of making sure that it stays within the realm of the gritty tone that O'Connor wants to go for. And for nothing else, it does fit the tone and atmosphere of what an action thriller should be. And I do find myself appreciating that it does stick to that. The production is decent. All the crew work shows the effort in making this look as high quality as it can. For a $44 million budget, it's actually kind of amazing to see this, because, yeah, we don't usually get a lot of movies that are less than $100 million. If they are, they always never markets them in a way where it actually tries to make people to go out and see it. This was prior to the times we're living in, where they made a $44 million budget. They're going to make sure that this movie gets attention. And it did. It made quite attention because it made its money back and then some. For this film to have a production that is of good quality and making sure that people went out and saw it, and showcasing, like I said, the amount of technical work that went into it, pretty well done if you ask me. The autism portrayal feels respectful. Everyone involved shows the care of addressing the character's traits, and though there are some times where it can be a little bit exaggerated, like I mentioned with Affleck being a little bit stilted at times, or maybe I think leaning on it too much. This is probably the most portrayal than most Hollywood films have ever tried to do with the subject matter, and that is a sad thing to say, because when you have a movie that, yes, the character is a killer. He kills people, he uncooks books for terrible, awful people. And yet he's autistic. I get it. But at the same time, if you look back on this movie and look at some of the movies that we are given, like most recently was something like The Unbreakable Boy, which I've heard nothing but not so good things about with regard to its portrayal of autism, I'd rather choose this because it's not insulting, nor is it actually focusing on somebody who isn't on the spectrum, like that film does, with it being about the father than the son aspect. This is about the character, Christian Wolf, how he has to handle it. And I would rather take that than the latter, if you ask me. But overall, I think they did a pretty decent job of actually explaining autism, what it's like to have it, and how, yeah, even in this world, nobody's gonna care. It's really up to people like me and so many other people who are on the spectrum to pretty much have our voice, especially in this day and age. Yeah, it's kind of cool to have a movie like this actually remind us that we can accomplish something. And yeah, even if it's killing people, I still enjoy this film, but there are some issues that does affect the film in the end. Here are now the negatives. The story is confusing. Now, having Christian Wolf uncook books for like a robotics company was interesting, but the more it goes on, it gets convoluted and it just starts to get confusing halfway through on how they explain not the like what Christian went through, his life and all that stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like throughout this movie he is trying to help a robotics company, one that helps people who have lost limbs. And as the movie goes along, there's just parts where I'm just kind of confused. Maybe it's just me, but like as I'm watching it, I'm being serious, you guys. I watch this movie and I watch movies like a hawk. I always pay attention no matter what. And even I was like, wait, what? Because it's a lot of jargoning that has to talk about the like numbers and statistics, and I'm not really good with math, so this is kind of maybe out of my range. But like how they were describing and how the film goes, it got to a point where all right, I'm just kind of lost by this point. And of course, there is a twist that's in here that's obvious, but I won't deny they did set it up. So I'm not gonna sit here and act like it was a terrible twist when it was set up from the get-go. The pacing runtime is, I think, a bit too long. Each scene at times is mixed with either fast-paced action with slow-down drama, which could have worked, but I just feel like there's like a mishmash because it's almost like a lot of it is mostly drama and some of it is action, but I feel like there's just not a good flow to it. With a runtime of 2 hours and 7 minutes, I think it could have been trimmed down to at least under or at least at 2 hours. I don't think this needed to go past it because by that point, I just feel like it's kind of losing steam a bit and it just feels like nothing's really flowing as well as it can. So I do think that it could have benefited itself if it was not as long as it was. The writing is inconsistent. Writer Bill Dubuque does well when talking about Christian's autism and what he went through, but the rest of it feels kind of generic and doesn't really stand out. At least the autism parts made the film at least interesting, if you ask me, because it wasn't. I think this would have been either okay or average, but I won't deny, I do think that at the very least, when it came to those discussions about Christian's traits and his struggles, I think that's where the movie was interesting, or about his past, than it was about what he was doing. And I don't mean to seem like that's a terrible thing. I'm just saying is something that I did find myself at least enjoying that aspect than the robotics part that takes up a good majority of the film. It might not be amazing, but I did overall enjoy what Ben Affleck and Gavin O'Connor had brought, and it's something to appreciate watching. And after all, this has more of a respectful and well thought out way of portraying autism than movies like Music or The Unbreakable Boy. And if you feel like those movies were insulting, let me tell you, if you watch something like this, or hell, at this point, you might as well just go watch Rain Man or Forrest Gump because those have better ways of showcasing autism but not demean them, or at least doing it in a most blatant stereotypical way. Christian Wolf, he's not somebody who needs help in terms of having somebody to guide him do stuff. He can do stuff his own. He's independent and he is efficient at it, and he's really good at his job. So I give a lot of credit to this movie in that if you thought that this movie was not good back in 2016 in terms of how it portrays autism, I would say give it another watch because in this day and age, like I said, I'd take this over those two movies that I mentioned that came out as of recently, and The Unbreakable Boy. Good thing I avoided that as best as possible. I'm going to give The Accountant a 7 out of 10. I think it was an enjoyable, good film. I think it does add itself in terms of actually having a better discussion with regards to having people on the spectrum, or at least characters on the spectrum. Even if Affleck himself isn't, I still give him credit in that he actually did study, he actually talked to individuals that were on the spectrum or loved ones, he actually read, he talked to professionals, so he actually put in a lot of hard work, and like I said, may not be autistic, but I rather take his portrayal of it than most other people. Take it for what it will, but hey, I did find myself liking it. So I will soon be doing my review for The Accountant 2. So yes, look forward to that review and other reviews coming soon.